Welcome to today's event at this year's Swindon Festival of Literature, which, as a result of restrictions to prevent the spread of that nasty little virus, has become a virtual online festival of literature. Thank you very much for joining us. We do hope that everything is well where you are. We're both pleased and grateful that human ingenuity, cutting-edge science, and digital technology make it possible for this show to go on, well, at least online. Now, boxing. What do you think it's all about? Standoffs, show-offs, and bloody noses? Or stability, sanctuary, and a sense of peace? Today's guest authors have written a book alliteratively titled Hats, Handwraps, and Headaches, A Life on the Inside of Boxing. Here it is, folks. In the foreword, a former world champion says this about it. It is my hope and my prayer that this book is successful because I want people to understand what perseverance truly is. Well, in a minute, we may find out. Please join me in giving a Swindon Festival of Literature welcome to today's guest co-authors, a Director of Learning in State Education, Lee Simpson, and a man whose life took many twists and turns before he became established as a trainer, coach, and mentor, not only to emerging young novice boxers, but to world-class fighters, Paddy Fitzpatrick. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
How you doing?
Good to see you both. Now, we're delighted to see you on screen, but it would have been nice if we could have seen you in our town, because Swindon in the spring compares to Paris in the spring. It's lovely. In fact, what do either of you know about Swindon in the spring or at any other time?
Should I go first?
Go ahead, dude.
Well, you're probably going to hear as I talk that I don't have a Wiltshire accent, so you'll hear a northeast accent from Durham and Sunderland. But I've been fortunate enough over 10 years now to be living in what I think you could describe as the jewel of the M4, Swindon. I live just south of the M4, easy walking onto the Marlborough Downs, and I think if you haven't been to Swindon and you don't know it well, you might be stunned to hear that not only is it a lovely place full of really down-to-earth great people, it's one of the most beautiful places in the country as soon as you start walking.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lee. I agree.
Now you're looking at me? I
am.
Well, I came here when I was 16 or so in 1986, and I was on my way to London, and my mother asked me to stop off here and say hello to her brother. And then I kind of ended up having a drink, getting a job, and making this my base on and off since then, since 1986. I enjoy it. I enjoy the people. I enjoy it. I keep coming back for some reason.
That's terrific. A German writer once said, if a place bores you, look at yourself, because everywhere is very similar. Human relationships are similar. And people who blame a place should look at themselves. So it's great to hear, Lee and Paddy, that you like Swindon, you settled here. Okay, we better get back to the topic in hand, the book, and the story behind the book, which is called Hats, Handwraps, and Headaches, A Life Inside Boxing. It's reckoned to be inspiring, surprising, and sometimes shocking. Lee, Paddy, tell us more.
Well, you all right if I go
ahead,
first here?
Roll.
So I've been fortunate enough to be coming and training at Paddy's gym now for just over 4 years. And initially, there was no idea for a book. I contacted Paddy at a time in my life where I'd hit 40. I've got quite a challenging, stressful job. I was finding things a little difficult personally, and I needed something that would help me with mental health, well-being, those kind of things. So being 40, I thought boxing probably a little late for someone who's 40. I'd done a little when I was a younger man. My dad was a decent standard boxer in the British Army. But as soon as I started to get educated and go to university, what I really wanted to be was a rock star and a poet. So I gave up entirely on boxing and sport, and focused entirely on writing and words. But when I made the decision to do something different, to train, I contacted quite a few boxing gyms in Swindon and Reading, because I work in Reading. And the only message I got back that was honest and respectful was from Paddy. And I'd sent a message saying, look, am I a fool? I'm a 40-year-old man. I'd like to come and learn. I'd like to train. Is this really a stupid thing to do? And I got a really powerful, really respectful, really humble message back saying, no, this would be a fantastic thing. You'd be more than welcome. And that gave me the confidence to come. So I came to the gym. I met Paddy and found that the culture in the gym was absolutely right for me. And as a teacher, I got talking to Paddy, because I'm a teacher, he's a teacher, and over time started to have longer conversations about boxers I've been reading about, particularly a boxer called Gene Tunney, who was a teacher himself. He lectured at Harvard on Shakespeare, as well as being a world champion. And over time, our friendship grew, and we talked more and more frequently about boxing, about teaching. And then I wrote a series of short articles called Pugilistic Pedagogy for a teaching magazine about what teachers could learn from boxing coaches. So basically, it was a thinly veiled version of what I was learning from working with Paddy. And from then, we started to talk much more about Paddy's experiences and Paddy's time in boxing. And as we talk more and more, I realized this wasn't just somebody who was working in Swindon, in the locality, in a local successful boxing gym. This was somebody who had had a career that I thought would be very, very exciting for other individuals to read about. And like you said when you introduced us, inspiring, surprising, shocking, traveling across the US, in Europe, working with world champions, working with Layla Ali, James Toney, Lehman Brewster, big names in boxing. And I'd wanted to write a book. I'd wanted to write something related to sport if possible. It was initially going to be football. I was going to write about Sunderland Football Club. But having come to the boxing gym, I found boxing far more inspiring as a subject to write about, and all the drama and the tragedy and the excitement. And then I put the idea to Paddy that I think there's a story here that the public in general, not just boxing fans, would be interested in. And it sort of built from there and grew from there. Would you say that was a reasonable summary?
That's a reasonable summary. That's a reasonable summary. I mean, I don't know where to lead on from there. Teach came to me and said he wanted to write a book, and would I give him a hand? And I thought initially it was just a book on boxing itself. So I said, no problem. And then he said, no, about me. I didn't think there was enough to write about. He did. We drank Guinness and poaching, and we ended up with a book.
And it is fascinating, because I'm not interested in boxing as such, even though I've watched many boxing fights and I used to sit with my dad and talk about it. But I read it with absolute fascination, in that on one page you say, Lee quotes Paddy, boxers are not regular people. They're a bit crazy. Well, I know you're saying that ironically and with affection, but I saw another side to this sport when I realized in every chapter, especially the chapters up to chapter 25, 26, and 25 and 26 are fascinating, because they deal with a whole series of fights in Swindon and the idea of boxing in education, but we'll come to that towards the end. It's absolutely fascinating. But I realized that you, Paddy, as a trainer and a coach, talk with your boxers in a way that I can't imagine Gareth Southgate talking with Harry Kane. You say, when I'm doing the Handwraps, it's a chance to get to know something. And all the way through, I feel emotion and a psychological relationship taking place. Am I right, Paddy, that that's an important part of training a fighter?
I think everything, period, in life is psychological. I think you live your whole life in your mind, and whatever's going on upstairs is what you play out. And you know, you see a lot of world champions in the gym. You see a lot of fighters that are able to perform at exactly the same level as all-time great fighters in the gym. But then when there's a date set and a time set, and you've got to do it at that time, most of those people that you see as world champions in the gym, it doesn't play out. So that comes down to the psychology of being able to bring yourself into the moment and ignore all the distractions, be it what the fight is for, be it for the belts that you'd fight for, the crowd, or anything else. And you've got to avoid all them and just go into yourself. And yeah, I just said the boxing is, I hear a lot of people say that boxing, you know, it's 70% mental and 30% skill, or 80% mental and 20% skill. It's 100% mental. You can see world champions that aren't particularly very good boxers, but they have immense mental strength and belief that what the tools that they have will be enough to do it. And they become world champions. And you see guys who have all the skill set in the world and you never hear about them. It's 100% mental, because if you can't hold it together mentally, you can't do it.
And this seems to be something that's consistent with one-to-one sports. You know, this, I play tennis seriously, and this is said often about tennis players. You know, you can get an impressive looking big un, but he can be beaten by an unimpressive looking little un, depending on what's going on in the heads, in the respective heads. In other words, it's actually a game of chess as well as a game of tennis in many cases. And is that the case with boxing as well, you feel then?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
100%. It's all mental. If you can't pull it together mental, you know, some people cripple and fall down under pressure, and some people, the best of them comes out under pressure, and they're the ones that go down in history, the guys that can pull it all together when they're under pressure.
yeah, yeah. Another thing that comes over from this book is that there's something noble and wonderful and honorable and that develops people, that helps them be someone. And yet I keep thinking, in other sporting activities, most of them, I don't know, swimming, tennis, we don't actually damage someone else's liver. We don't break their jaw. And when I was reading about the bits in the gym, I was going, oh, I was thinking, how can Lee, this lovely man who is a teacher and loves words, go to this place where, by the way, I used to play table tennis in the Ferndale gym. Lovely that you're using it that way, Paddy. And come home and say, it ached for days. And I think, why did you do it, Lee? The serious point here is physically hurting someone in order to do them good in the long run feels a little bit, you need to defend that in my eyes. Can you?
I think it's interesting because I also happen to like bullfighting, and I know yourself, you're an aficionado of Spanish things, and that's another thing that can be difficult to explain, the fact that I like those things. And the first thing to say is it is quite difficult to talk about why fighting or inflicting pain or having pain inflicted upon you feels like a noble process. It's hard to articulate that emotionally, though not only does it feel like that, there are thousands of years of literature, particularly among males, though not in the modern age, that explain that. But I think I'd explain it away differently by talking about the culture. So the object is to compete in a ring. that can't be disputed. But that competition has a set of rules, a level of respect. For example, the conversations you have beforehand, the touching of gloves. It's not necessarily when you're training in the gym about hurt, because it's not professional. It's about being able to be successful in doing something before the person in front of you does it, or to a certain extent for me, because I'm very, very much not very good at this. It's about managing psychology, so feeling comfortable to stand there, knowing somebody is better than me, and be able to cope with that psychologically and say, I'm okay with this. It gives you a level of confidence. It gives a thrill. But the culture thing, I think, is the most important part. The level of respect that each of the people who are training in the gym has for each other as human beings is the most significant part for me. And I would underscore this by saying, I'm not sure that happens in every gym. I don't know lots of boxing gyms. I know this boxing gym. I have a friend who goes to a different boxing gym in the south coast of England. He left his boxing gym and joined a different one because he didn't like the culture. He thought the culture didn't train people to be respectful, kind, honest, trustworthy. And I think the culture at this gym, which is Paddy's gym, does that. And I think that comes down to Paddy, and it comes down to whoever is the coach. You can't dispute the fact that there is something primal. And there is something primal in it. It's men, they're not entirely exclusively, but often more men than females, competing with each other in quite an old-fashioned and in some ways primal way. But I see a huge amount of benefit in that for my own personal peace. And I know that there is a paradox too, that I can come to the gym, train for 2 hours, get the advice that I would get from Paddy and from the other coaches who were in there, spend some time in the ring sparring and controlling emotion and controlling my body, and go home and feel like a more literate, more peaceful, more honest human being. And I try to articulate that in the book, that it makes me feel like that, but I can't fully explain the why. And that's perhaps one of the things that's inspired me so much. I'm quite used to being able to explain everything. And this is one thing I can't explain perfectly.
No. I mean, it might be something to do with dopamine and endorphins and adrenaline, that you are self-inducing a level of a drug, that gives you a feel-good factor, and therefore you feel good, and therefore you feel good about yourself. I don't know what Paddy says to this idea of making someone else physically hurt being a good thing for them.
Well, the physical hurt is, I think even if you dig deep, all pain, and I'm not saying this is correct, these are just my thoughts that go through my head, all pain is mental. And you might think, well, no, if you broke your leg or if you had your arm blown off, you'd feel it. But that's been proved incorrect, because you hear about stories of men at war that would be carrying the flag. That's their job, to carry the flag into battle. And the battle going on along, and they've been shot or blown up and lost a limb, and they are so immersed at the task at hand that they don't realize that until a point that they fall down and can't get up, and then focus on the injury, and that's when the pain kicks in. But if you're able to keep your mind focused on the task at hand, the pain is a secondary thing to that. That's why I think the most important thing is the mental attitude, is psychological.
And I assume not many people go away from your gym injured or battered.
No, it depends. It depends who. You know, I have people like teaching that who come down for fitness and to test themselves, and I have to realize what level they're at. It's like lifting a weight. You can imagine a small little 8-stone dude going to a gym. You're not going to ask him to lift the same weight as the 16-stone man. So when a guy comes to the gym, you have to kind of gauge where he's at mentally and push him just beyond that mental limit. But when you get guys who have a very high mentality and understanding of what's expected of them, and they're professionals, then yes, they go away with injuries. They can get cuts or broken hands or broken noses. That happens.
Something that was fascinating, Matt, is I've spent a lot of my career, been teaching for over 20 years, and a substantial part of my job is training teachers. So every year I train a lot of people to come into the profession in my organization and elsewhere. And some of the places that I've found the most articulate explanations of what makes effective teaching is Paddy and some of the coaches Paddy's trained in the gym, to the extent that I've taken the model that's being used in the gym, and then I use that model in my professional life with university educated professionals. I really don't see a distinction. And maybe, I mean, it's not necessarily that about literature, but that's a fascinating thing about how well the individuals in this gym, they can teach.
Yeah, I'd love to come back to that, and we will, because that's the way the book ends, with this fantastic project you have in mind. But just to stay in the gym just for a moment, I mean, part of my question about the hurt, the physical hurt, was actually just playing devil's advocate, because it's been said in many different ways that sticks and stones can hurt your bones, but words will never hurt you. And that's a defensive little saying that children use in the playground, because it's the other way around. In other words, they are trying to feel good about something that is painful. And everybody knows that words can be very much more hurtful than a black eye, much, and last much longer. So I understand what you're saying. And by the way, just to clarify, I'm not an aficionado of Spain. If I'm an aficionado of anything, it's South America, where Spanish is spoken, but there's a similar but different culture. I want to ask you a question about something that an author, a philosopher, brought up the other night from France, and that is that there is an art of succeeding in life in all things by not trying too hard. In other words, not forcing something, but finding a way so that a flow comes. In tennis, we say, you freeze at the elbow if you think about the shot. And I don't know if there's an equivalent in boxing. Would you, either of you, or both of you, like to say something about not trying too hard in order to succeed in boxing?
Do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
I mean, my own personal experience of training at the gym is the times when I've come away feeling the most successful are firstly the times I've come away where Paddy or one of the other coaches has actually said, you looked like you were actually doing it right there for a small amount of time, admittedly, but you actually looked like that was that looked good. And on those occasions, I've found that I've actually been doing very little other than moving and thinking, but not actually trying to do anything other than cope mentally with what could be a pressured experience. Whereas on the times where I've felt tense, or I wanted to really do well and tried really hard, you ultimately make a number of mistakes. And of course, one of the things that one of the coaches at the gym said I thought quite powerfully to me was, one of the beauties of boxing was if you make a mistake, you know about it very quickly because you experience pain. And then that pain teaches you not to make that mistake again, or not to make it as frequently. And certainly when you're trying hard and overthinking, and particularly for me, overthinking things, it hasn't been anywhere near successful. And then there's days where I felt like I'm barely thinking, and yet it's been much more successful experience. And I think sometimes it's like that in professional life as well. I suppose that's when you've automatized something, when you feel like you've got into that zone, for want of a better way of putting it. Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, I think for me, thinking and reacting are polar opposites. If you're thinking, you can't be reacting. And when you're trying to do something, you're thinking about the result you want at the end, but you haven't got there yet. So the harder you try, the further away you get. You have to focus on trust the process and only be thinking about what you're doing, remembering to do the things, say a game plan. If I say to you, this is the game plan, you should only be thinking about the game plan, not the result that you expect to get from that. And the problem is when you start to box, it's impossible not to think, because you get hit with a shot, you feel pain from it, and you think about the pain of the shot, and you think about the mistakes. But the more experience you get, you don't think about the mistakes, you think about the adjustments, you think about the game plan at hand, so what you're doing at that given point, and then you end up with the results. But if you're trying to think of what you're trying to achieve, well, then you can't be reacting. Polar opposites.
Right. Fantastic. That's good to hear, Paddy. Something else. Throughout the book, I discovered that boxers have nicknames. I noticed that trainers don't quite so much. For example, I haven't heard one for you, Paddy. It's Paddy Fitzpatrick, but maybe there is one. And actually, you had another name to begin with. But everyone else seems to get nicknames: Father, Bear, Teach. Why? What's the culture of these nicknames? I mean, are they compliments or are they a tease? What's going on?
You go around to that one.
I have an extremely bad memory that is worsening as the years go by. So when I see somebody, I recognize a face, but I am terrible at names. So the first thing that comes into my head when I see somebody is the name I then give them, because it was the first thing that came into my head, therefore I'll remember it. So that's where the nicknames come into.
And I think,
can I just check, it's not only you who does it, because surely when you go to LA and these other places, they do it too, don't they?
Well, the best names that fighters get are the ones that were given to them as a result of how they're fighting or so on. Usually when a fighter picks a nickname, that can be block and reaction in itself. Imagine if you call yourself, like James Toney's called Lights Out. Imagine if you gave that name to yourself before you ever started fighting. All you'd be trying to do is knock people out, and therefore you'd be thinking of the end result and not reacting to what's happening to you. So he got given that name because he put people's lights out. So the best fighters have their names given to them as a result of how they fight. I wouldn't advise picking one. I give them to guys. I give them to my fighters when I'm turning them over sometimes, just to help promote them, to help with their ticket sales and promote them, and to make people hear a name that they'll remember, and therefore remember if they saw that person fighting, just purely from a promotional point of view.
I have to say, Matt, that I loved it because it sort of gave me this alter ego. And so being in the book, when I called people to do interviews and had the privilege of speaking to Layla Ali and James Toney and Lehman Brewster and Eamon O'Kane, among others, the fact that I would ring LA and someone would be like, "Hey, it's Teach on the phone," and then James Toney, a man that I admire tremendously, would come on and go, "Hey, are you the Teacher man?" And then the man they call the Teacher, the Irish guy, and I didn't dare tell him I wasn't Irish. He must have thought with the accents that we both got accents, so he must have thought it was Irish. You got to forgive a guy in LA, I suppose. But having a nickname that became like transatlantic, I just got a huge amount of pathetic pleasure out of that.
Yeah. No, that's terrific, and neither of you speak like the Queen, so Americans would naturally think you were Irish.
Yeah.
That's the kind of logic, isn't it?
He thought I was Irish.
Okay, because the nicknames made parts of this book a very and I felt like an outsider looking in to something that was almost club-like, which is really interesting. Or it almost felt like a family, even though you're trying to knock one another's lights out. There was all the way through, and even though, you know, coaches disagreed with fighters and fighters went looking for a purse they couldn't get with some trainer or other, and so on and so forth, So there were disputes, and there's a terrific one that runs right through this book, but readers will have to get the book to find out about that. No spoilers from me. But despite that, there was a kind of family spirit, which is fascinates me again when you've given one another broken jaws and aching ribs. I mean, I don't want to probe this too deeply, but it does seem a bizarre contradiction. Do you want to shed any more light on that?
When you have let's look at the pros. Let's look at that as opposed to people who are doing it for fitness or something else. When you have pros in the gym, every pro, of course, their desire is to turn pro and become successful, and the ultimate result of being successful in fighting is to become a world champion. So when you're in the gym and you have multiple world champions there, or multiple people with the talent to become world champions, they have that ego of being separate from everyone else and being, in their eyes, above other people in that given sport. And the respect then comes when they spar other men and that other man checks them as well and doesn't bow down to them. That then creates a sense of respect, and that respect then creates a form of friendship. But the best men in the world will put that friendship quickly to the side if it means they got to fight each other.
Yeah.
So it's more of a respect than a friendship. A respect for each other because I believe I'm this good, but that man got in there and proved to me that he can live with me in there, so I got to respect that.
But that's a really subtle definition and an important one, you know, respect and friendship. And I think respect is number one, friendship maybe number two, or they vie closely, but respect is really important part of it. I don't want to run out of time. We have about 10 or 12 minutes left to deal with a part of the book that I find fascinating and important. I don't want to get too serious, but bearing in mind that this is a festival of literature, and one of our slogans is "Life is for learning" at the Swindon Festival of Literature. And I find people are never happier than when they have learned something. It's fascinating. Every person, whether they're formally educated or so-called uneducated, nobody is completely uneducated, but I keep seeing examples of people looking happier when they've learned something, when they've discovered something. And it's a form of pleasure. It's a kind of it's part of entertainment. Anyway, so I want to dwell on that a little bit, and which you'll deal with in the last two chapters of the book. And so I want to read you a couple of little passages, and then have you tell us a bit more. No matter what's happening in the world, there is always a good vibe around Paddy's gym. And some people say it's the Bob Marley music, and other people say no, it's Paddy's hat, and other people say no, it isn't. It's because he matches you up with the right people. So there are obviously many things. Boxing at Paddy's is all I've ever known, said Lewis. I have never known, and this is a young man, not a professional, a young man from Swindon who's come to it. I've never known any different than the morals I've learnt in and around the gym. If I hadn't come to Paddy's gym, I don't think I would be the man I am today. That is why I think boxing can do wonders for kids in schools. I've seen firsthand people come into the gym who have changed their lives around for the better just by coming to the gym. Paddy's gym isn't only a boxing gym, it's a community, a family of people trying to better themselves. Paddy pushes you physically and mentally, while at the same time making sure that you enjoy yourself and have fun with other people. The vibe and the character in the gym is like nothing I had experienced before. From Bob Marley being blasted out on the speakers to the photos of champions on the walls, there is a constant feeling of positive energy. It is a place where people of different backgrounds can come together and help each other. Paddy is not just offering boxing as sport, absolutely not. This is boxing as hope. Boxing as a way to find peace and begin to love yourself and other people. Boxing as a tool to bring the community together. And in some cases, boxing as a road to a form of personal redemption. Paddy and Lee and others want to start expanding the gym into something called the Community Sports and Wellness Centre, which would mean that he would support the community with boxing exercises, fitness, yoga, counselling, health, nutrition, etc., etc., etc. Wow. We start off with people knocking their lights out and people talking of, and you talking of purses and falling out with somebody called Groves, who should be grateful for what you did for him, is my opinion, but we'll leave that aside. And you end the book by talking of yoga and counseling and education. Gentlemen, tell us what's going on here.
Paddy.
Well, the schooling is what we ended up talking about. Boxing to me is a way of understanding life. I think that everything that happens in life happens in a boxing ring. So it's helped me to be able to make sense of stuff that goes on in my life. Then I think that when I'm working with youth and that come through, it's able to help them simplify life a bit. Doesn't make it any easier, but at least it gives you a chance to understand that there's ways you can deal with things. You know, you get lost when you feel that there's no hope or you have no direction. That's when you get lost. So if you try to deal with life just on its own, we don't even know why we're here in the first place. So how are we going to deal with things if we don't know even the end result of life? How are we going to deal with things that are happening now? But if you can attach it to something that you're able to see played out from start to finish, as in a fight, and then relate it to that, then you can understand that even when you get knocked in your ass, you didn't see something coming and you're on your ass. If you want to continue, you got to get up. It's okay to lose rounds. You can still win the fight. It's okay for stuff to go wrong in life. You can still take a break, sit in your stool, and get advice from somebody in the corner and make an adjustment. And the boxing for me is probably second place to wanting to help not just my youth, but to help myself to try and figure this thing out that we're in, because we have no idea. You know, we have no idea the end result of this. You know, we live life and we can all guesstimate what happens when we leave here, but we don't know. We don't know, and that's really easy to get lost in life if you don't know what's the point of it all. Why would I bother? I'll just deal with what you're dealing with now and forget looking for the end result. How can I deal with what I'm going through right now? And then the other rounds take care of themselves. I got to get through this round first before I'm allowed to even go into the next round.
That's a great analogy, Paddy, a great analogy. And part of what I read was Lee quoting Lewis, but the end part that I read was Lee writing from your conversations, and Lee wrote it. And I really think, Lee, that's, I don't want to compliment you too much, but that's a terrific line, that if hope is part of the strap line in your setup, I think it's an absolutely key word. And I agree with Paddy, we don't quite know what we're doing spinning through space here, but we do our best. And it's the next step that counts rather than wherever we're going to end up. So are you behind Paddy on this project, Lee, bearing in mind that your profession is formal education?
Well, one of the things that I think most people don't recognize is that of all the interventions in society that cause young people to change their path if their path was a negative one. So, for example, gang culture, county lines, the encouragement to join those things. Pound for pound, if you'll pardon the sporting metaphor, boxing clubs, amateur boxing clubs and boxing clubs like Paddy's save, and I use that verb purposely, save more children, I think, than any other sport. And what's really fascinating about this is that when the government gave money to sport during COVID to keep sport alive. It gave 40-50 million to racing, horse racing. It gave money to rugby union. It gave money to football. It didn't give a single penny to boxing, and yet boxing clubs tend to be in deprived areas, supporting young people and their families in those areas to see that there is a positive way that they can move forward when they feel like they've potentially grown up in a challenging or a brutalized way. And so, I'm quite proud to be one of the trustees on the community group that Paddy set up, to be able to give the people in Swindon in the first instance, but much wider, we hope, maybe Wiltshire, and then outside of Wiltshire, an experience that says, well, if mainstream education is not working for you, if your mental health and well-being is challenged, if you're getting yourself wrapped up in things that could become exceptionally negative, there is a way out. And that way out is hope. And the hope comes through what you learn through boxing. And it links back to the previous points you were making about boxing itself per se. Boxing does involve an element of legalized violence, there's no dispute there. But it also involves learning strategy, culture, discipline, respect, kindness, and all of these values that people forget you need in order to become a successful human being. And boxing can give you those things too. So I'm more than 100% behind this. And it's not just me. There are a number of other people on the trust board who are involved with this. And we're all desperate for this to be a success.
And it's just not surprising that boxing is misunderstood because of some of the things I said earlier, punching your lights out and so on. And in a way, another physical activity, running, has often been misunderstood as only to do with elite people winning races. And I don't know if you've heard of the phenomenon called park run, where people go for a regular run at a regular time, all shapes and sizes, all ages. And it's proved to be a phenomenon, a fantastic success for a sense of well-being and personal development. Quite remarkable. And now finally, when it's sort of proved itself, that it's not about winning medals, it's actually about challenging yourself and finding a way and so on. It is being supported, and I do hope you manage to get boxing in the same way. And I'll also make a public announcement here before witnesses that the Swindon Festival of Literature, as long as it continues to survive, will help you get inspiring speakers for your education centre. I'd love to support you in any way we can. Gentlemen, do you have any final words of wisdom? Although there's a great book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, and there's a passage in here which says, which is all about Paddy and other boxers' vulnerability, and which is such a beautiful quality that we all need to acknowledge in ourselves. But do you have any words of wisdom just before we wrap and ring the bell for the final round?
Can I go first?
Go ahead.
I'd like to encourage anybody who's listening to this. Firstly, I'd like to thank them for listening to it. I mean, the two of us, when we were first writing this, had no idea that the amount of people who've been interested in it would be interested. So, I feel humbled by anybody listening to what we're saying. But I would encourage everybody listening, regardless of their ability levels, to get out there and do something physical to help with their mental health and well-being, because it seems to me that in the modern world, we created a distinction between mental and physical health that the ancients, so the ancient Greeks, for example, never did. The idea of healthy mind, healthy body were totally essential. And I myself created that distinction for a while. And through coming to the gym, and Paddy's gym particularly, I've managed to bring those things together, and it's helped me so much as a person. And secondly, I'd encourage people, even if boxing is not their thing, to delve into the book, because a secondary thing that I certainly brought from writing this book's also about what it is to be a good person, what it is to be resilient and get through challenges, and what it is to be a positive influence in your community. And those things, I think, matter no matter what town or village you live in.
Thank you, Lee.
There's always a way. There's always a way. There's always a chance. You've got to, like I said, especially with what's going on now because of COVID, you know, there's a lot of people who, like I said to you before, you live your whole life in your mind. You can spend too much time in there, and you end up focusing on the things that your mind is saying is going wrong. But there's always a chance to turn it around. You know, some of the best fights in the world have been remembered because a man has lost probably most of the rounds of the fight and then finds a way to knock the other dude out before the final bell. So there's always an opportunity to turn things around, and you don't do it on your own. Even the fighters that win, Sugar Ray Leonard fighting Tommy Hearns, he was losing bad. At the end of the 14th round, it was still a 15-round fights back then. The only thing that his coach said to him, Angelo Dundee, he said, "You're blowing it, son. You're blowing it." But that was enough for him to stand up and remember he had the tools to do this. And instead of getting tight and thinking, I've only got 3 minutes left, he stood up, he shook his shoulders out, went back out there, got back to his boxing and knocked out Tommy Hearns. So there is always a chance and an opportunity to turn it around so long as you're still in the fight. Well, no matter how crap things are, you're still in the fight. If you're waking up in the morning, you're still in the fight. So, you know, you might sometimes need to change trainer. You might need to listen to somebody else. You might need to freshen up the way that you're learning. And fighters do that by going to different coaches and so on, or adding people to their team. And in everyday life, if what you're doing isn't working, but you keep being with the same people, listening to the same crowd, doing the same things, you're going to end up in the same place. But if you get somebody fresh on board, or listen to somebody new, or just change what you're doing, it might not correct it, but at least it'll change the direction you're going. And there's always a chance.
See, we're not all Sugar Ray Leonard, but there's hope for everybody, always, as you say. This is a great Paddy. This book is available. We'll show the details on our website. So folks, if you want to get hold of the book, it's available online and for good bookshops when they open. The Swindon Festival of Literature says, Lee Simpson, Paddy Fitzpatrick, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've appreciated it.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you, man. Peace.